Hello, welcome to the course on Stalin and Stalinism in Russian history. We are beginning now. Today I shall tell you about what the course is all about and what Russia was in the late 19th century and early 20th century, Russia to which Stalin was born, and a bit about his childhood. But first about the cause. There are many isms in human history and in the present. Capitalism, socialism, Marxism, Leninism, Nazism, fascism, totalitarianism, authoritarianism, and many more. Each of these notions represents a certain theory or a social system or a social-political construct. Stalinism was a political and socio-economic system which was created in Russia, then the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, in the late 1920s, early 1930s. Some of its elements survived its creator, Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Communist Party, by almost 4 decades. The system that Stalin created defined the lives of over 150 million Soviet people. It also defined the lives of the population of other countries in the socialist bloc in Europe and Asia, which emerged after the Second World War. And it influenced developments on a global scale. Internationally, Stalin was one of the most influential political figures who made the 20th century what it was. For the Russians, Stalin was the symbol of economic progress and future prosperity. He is credited with organizing the hitherto unimaginably fast industrialization of the backward agrarian country which Russia had been. He was also behind the equally fast collectivization of its agriculture. In Russia, Stalin is valorized as the main organizer of the Soviet victory in the Second World War. Stalin is nostalgically remembered for creating the socialist bloc and spreading Soviet influence throughout the world. He is credited with turning Russia into a global superpower able to compete with the United States, the richest and the most powerful country in the world, and often do better. During his life, Stalin was revered almost as a deity by the Russians and by communists throughout the world. Nikita Khrushchev, Stalin's successor, attempted to dismantle Stalin's cult, but it survived. And after the collapse of the USSR, it blossomed again as part of Russian nostalgia for the glorious past. All this, despite the fact that Stalin's rule cost Russia millions of lives. Millions, from humble peasants to priests to the best and the brightest among the Soviet elite. Millions perished in Stalin's prisons and labor camps. Millions died in famines, which were the result of Stalin's policy. Stalin's industries were built to a large extent by prisoners, virtually by slave labor. And Soviet agriculture never fully recovered from the excesses of collectivization. The map that you see here is the map of Stalin's camps. Have a look how many of them were there. Legions of Stalin's apologists and admirers today either ignore these facts or say that these sacrifices were necessary for modernizing Russia. Obviously, for them, this goal was more important than human lives. Modernization did indeed help Russia to win the war, at the cost of nearly 30 million lives. But it was also the kind of modernization and the political structure created by Stalin that after the war led the country to stagnation and ultimately to collapse. Whichever way you look at it, It is impossible to understand Russian history of the 20th century without understanding Stalin and Stalinism. But understanding the Stalin phenomena is important not only for those interested in Russia. The 20th century gave rise to several brutal dictatorships, which were seemingly incompatible with modernity and with its proclaimed goals of equality, social justice, and human rights. Moreover, several of these dictatorships, Stalin's, Mao Zedong's, and Hitler's, for example, called themselves socialist. Communists always proclaimed communism, a society of full equality, freedom, and prosperity, as their ultimate goal. In 1935, Stalin actually announced that the first stage of that order, socialism, had already been built in the USSR. How then could it be that the party which fought against Tsarist autocracy ended up establishing a dictatorship? How could it happen that the roadmap to equality, dignity, and happiness led to mass murder, impoverishment, slave labor, and economic collapse? And why did the population subjected to such ordeals take it all for such a long time? Why is it that many still glamorize the main organizer of that order? It is crucially important to understand how Stalin's dictatorship, as well as any other similar regime, came into being and how it worked in order to try to avoid repeating its trajectory.